Hey everyone, I have a guest here with me today, one of my colleagues at TWU, Dr. Mandy Stewart. You want to introduce yourself to everyone?
I teach in the bilingual ESL program area, and my office is down from Dr. Krutkus.
So she is going to introduce us to a few key ideas and approaches for bilingual education today. And so I have a few questions for her. Hopefully she's going to be able to answer them.
Let's
Right?
see.
So the first question is, what are ways that we can approach teaching English language learners?
Well, there are various ways, but I think a simplified version that you're going to learn in your class, which does serve a good purpose, is to understand the ways we can view students' first language. So the first is to view that first language as a problem. So in this way, we want to replace it with English really as soon as possible because that language is causing a problem. The second is when we think of the language more as a crutch. So we recognize we don't want students to lose out on instruction for a certain amount of time. We want them to develop some foundational L1 literacy skills, but we don't really plan to continue to nurture that language growth. So that is language as a crutch. But the most beneficial is when we view students' languages as resources, and we want to fully develop not just the L2 English, but also the L1. So students can be fully bilingual, biliterate, so possess high literacy levels in both their L1 and the L2, and then be bicultural as well.
Now, what do you mean when you say L1 and L2? What does that mean?
L1 first language, L2 second language.
Okay.
However, I've taught many students, particularly refugee students, who will already speak 4 or 5 languages before they start learning English. So in a general sense, L1 are any of those languages they already know, and English is the L2 or the target language.
In the United States, we probably talk about L1 and L2. In other countries, we probably talk about like L7, huh?
Right. It's very different.
So what if I was just a lazy teacher who just said, this is too much work for me. I don't really want to change my curriculum or my teaching at all for bilingual students. Are there any reasons I can't do that?
No, absolutely not. I think monolingual teachers or teachers who do not speak the student's L1 can still use that student's first language and culture in many ways. Even though I speak Spanish, in my research right now, I teach students whose first languages I don't speak at all, and I still find ways to use their language and use their culture in the classroom.
Okay. And also, we do know that you can't just totally ignore it, right? Because Lau versus Nichols, the Supreme Court case, actually said legally you have to make changes to your curriculum, right?
In order to provide them English language development. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to use or develop their L1.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying. So, all right, a second question I have is, what misunderstandings do people often have about second language acquisition?
Especially here in the United States, we have a lot of misunderstandings about bilingualism and second language acquisition. A lot of this is because in 1966, which is not that long ago, a researcher named McNamara said, very scientifically, that bilingualism led to, his exact words, mental retardation. We know now that is not true. In fact, it's the opposite. But still, because we live in a generally monolingual society or culture, at least a lot of us, we don't understand how multiple languages work in the brain. A lot of us think that there's a separate place in the brain for L1 than there is for L2, when we actually know that that's completely false.
Okay, so how does it really work then?
Everything is together. So because I already understand how to do addition, if I were going to learn how to do that in Chinese, I don't need to go back and start putting 2 dots plus 2 dots. I already know those skills. That's the common underlying proficiency. If I want to express my knowledge of those skills in Chinese, I just need the language to help me do that. I do not need to relearn that skill.
So what's this iceberg analogy? I've seen people use this before.
That's the common underlying proficiency. So that was my illustration of addition.
Okay. All right, well, so one last question I have is, what are ways we can connect with English language learners both inside of school and outside of school?
First, outside of school, I think it's really important that you know who your students are and you know their families and their communities, and not to make assumptions, and not to go in to that with a very deficit mindset, but instead to be very purposeful, to adopt an asset mindset. So to see the beauty in their language, in their culture, to see all of the funds of knowledge that are available in their communities, in their families. I think once you know that, then you can use that in your classroom. I do that a lot through literature in my research, but you can also do it by what your students are writing about, what they're discussing about, different approaches they might have to problem solving or science and social studies concepts. But we need to be very purposeful to know that knowledge and then bring it into the classroom.
And Luis Moll has talked about that a lot, how we can get into the communities and see what the communities bring to our schools, as opposed to seeing anything we see that they, any struggles that the community may be going through, but see the strengths of the community.
And how that can enrich our classroom experience.
Great. What about in class? So there's some ideas about things we can do in class to help English language learners?
There's a lot of basic strategies you'll learn about giving students wait time, using journal writing, using partners to discuss, modifying your own speech, which is something I continually need to work on, and using graphic organizers and visuals, other ways that they can connect to what you are teaching, even if they don't understand every single word. What I always think is, if someone were teaching this in a language that were new to me, such as Korean, what would I need to understand what was going on in the classroom?
Thank you so much for helping us delve in a little bit into bilingual education, how to educate students who are learning English. And I think the thing we can agree on is that one of the best things you can do is look at it as a strength in your classroom, that having multiple languages in your classroom is a good thing and can help you all grow. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks.